into airplane mode or silent mode for your cell phones. Uh, well, of course, I had to do it because I'm the one talking. Okay, so this is an interactive program. So the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. If you have a comment during the presentations, please speak out, and you can quickly speak out just by holding down your space bar.
Robert, is there any way that you can maybe turn the volume on your microphone up? Someone did say it's a little hard to hear you.
Oh, let me see here. Let's jump out of. Let's go over to here. Microphone. Yeah. Okay, testing 1, 2, 3. My microphone level is way down.
Here.
So audio settings. It takes a while here. Audio microphone. How to get all the way down there? Is this better?
Yep, I hear it.
Okay. A little bit more. How's that?
I think that's good.
Okay. Good. Okay. So, here we are. So, as I said, this is an interactive program, and the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. We're going to have a few quizzes today. Come on, let's go. I have to get the focus back into my. There we go. We have a few quizzes today. So whenever you see this little picture here, that means we have a quiz. Some are easy, some are not so easy. Some will call on your prior knowledge, and some will be from this presentation right here. Now, when I went through instructor school in the Navy, they taught me if you want to emphasize something, just knock and get everybody's attention. So here's an example of a quiz. What's the significance of 221b? Anybody? Just hold down your space bar, and there's my brother Bill waving at us.
Yeah, that's the address for Sherlock Holmes.
That's exactly right, 221B Baker Street. Okay, so here's today's program. First we in session 1 here, we talk about the important people, the participants. Then we'll take a short break and then talk about all the fun stuff, books, movies, TVs, and so forth. And then we sign off. So, any questions? Everybody comfortable? Let's hope so. Hey, see some thumbs up there. So, the game is afoot. Yeah, Sherlock was very, yeah, Sherlock just one of his favorite expressions. Sherlock Holmes is the greatest man who never lived. Created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, this character and his companion, Dr. John H. Watson, have endured the test of time. Doyle wrote 56 short stories and 4 novels detailing the exploits of the duo, casting Watson as Holmes's biographer. These stories have never been out of print since the first anthology was printed in 1892. The full set of stories is referred to as the canon. Oops, sorry about that. I'm a Nikon man myself. There we go. That's more better. Okay, here we have a survey. How many of you have read at least one Sherlock Holmes story? Besides me? Okay. I can't see everybody here, but we have a few, I see a few hands. Okay. How many have read all of them? Okay, and how many of you have read all of them several times? And of course. Okay, that's what this presentation is all about, Sherlock Holmes and the incredible phenomena surrounding him. We will delve into this a little bit later, but first we explore the major players in this saga. We start with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, or ACD as we affectionately call him. Why do I start with Doyle and not Holmes? Anybody?
He was the creator.
He's the creator, sure. And without him, we wouldn't know anything about Sherlock Holmes. There are several excellent biographies about Doyle, and the two major sources were used for this segment. First is the most useful website, Sherlockian.net, and that's what you're looking at right here. It's hosted by Michigan State University, who took over from Chris Redmond up in Toronto. Therein is the Arthur Conan Doyle Encyclopedia, which contains a grunch of information. There's the encyclopedia. The second, Conan Doyle, a biography by Pierre Norden, is an especially valuable reference because Norden was one of the last biographers to have a direct access to Doyle's papers. Written in French, the English translation unfortunately left out many of the longer passages and the appendices. It's an excellent work nonetheless. Now, I got this at a library sale. I don't remember the library, but I only paid a couple of bucks for it. If you try to buy it from a place like ABE Books or something like that, you're going to pay a lot for this particular volume. Arthur Ignatius Conan Doyle was born in Picardy Place in Edinburgh on 22 May 1859 to Charles Altamont Doyle and Mary Foley Doyle. He was the second of 7 children. His older sister, Annette Conan Doyle, and he were named after their father's uncle, Michael Conan, who had no children of his own. So they preserved his family name for the ages. His mother was called the Mam, and he was a profound impact on Doyle's life. He was sent to Jesuit school at the age of 9, then on to Stonyhurst College 2 years later. Well, there he wrote the Mam regularly, a tradition continuing until her death in 1920. This filled many details of his life. One result of his Jesuit education was his total rejection of Christianity and becoming an agnostic and later a spiritualist. Where in Edinburgh was ACD born? I just told you.
It started with the letter P.
Right, the Picardy Place. Or,
There you
go. Okay, just checking to see if you guys were paying attention there.
I've been there.
Okay. Me too. Okay, so after a brief interlude, he attended the University of Edinburgh to study for a medical degree in 1876. There he met 2 professors who would have a profound impact on his future. Professor Joseph Bell morphed into Sherlock Holmes, as Bell could read symptoms just by observing a patient. Professor William Rutherford was the prototype for ACD's favorite character, Professor George Edward Challenger. He wrote his first 2 published stories here, The Mystery of Sasasa Valley and The American's Tale. To earn money for his family, he worked as a medical assistant and then as a doctor aboard ship in Greenland. So here we are with another quiz. Which one is Doyle? That's a motley
One of
looking
the
creature.
5.
No. Okay, actually, there he is right there. Okay, don't forget he was a young man at the time. He kind of looks like what we're familiar with, but not really. After graduation in 1881, he returned to sea, but soon opted for land, opening a practice in South Sea as an ophthalmologist. His partner turned out to be a rotter, absconding with all their funds. A lack of patience left ACD plenty of time to read and write, but his stories met with little success. He married his first wife, Louisa Hawkins, in 1885. She bore him 2 children, Mary in 1889, and Kingsley in 1892. His first novel in 1886 did not get published until years later, but his second eventually sold for £25 and was published in 1887. Pay a lot of attention to that little volume right there. While he was building his family, he concentrated on historical novels like Micah Clark in 1889, mainly due to the influence of his mother, who was an admirer of Walter Scott. Based on his success with that novel, he wrote The White Company in 1891, which has been compared to Ivanhoe. If any of you have read that one. ACD once hailed a cab in Paris. He threw his handbag inside, climbed in. Before he could say a word, the cabbie said, "Where to, Dr. Conan Doyle?" "You recognize me?" said Doyle. "Not really," said the cabbie, "but I read in the paper that you were on vacation in the south of France. I saw you getting off the Marseille train, and you have a tan that indicates you were in the sun for a week. You're a writer from the ink spot on your fingers, the keen look of a medical man, and your clothes are English. Altogether, you surely must be the creator of Sherlock Holmes. Besides, your name's on your luggage tag." Got to have a little bit of fun here. In 1880, that was from Isaac Asimov's Treasury of Humor. Okay, love that Sherlockian humor. In 1889, J.M. Stoddard of Lippincott's magazine in the U.S. had dinner with Doyle and Oscar Wilde, hiring them to write 2 stories. Wilde's was the picture of Dorian Gray, and ACD wrote The Sign of the Four. Later editions of the novel dropped the second V in the title. Never did figure out why, so it's Sign of the Four or Sign of Four. And the meeting resulted in a cordial but distant friendship between the 2 authors. The Doyles went to Vienna for a few months for more medical training and took up residence in Montague Place upon return to London. No patience meant more writing. Enter the Strand magazine, first published in January of 1891. Publisher George Nunes, I never did figure out how to pronounce that particular name, was looking for an anchor series, and ACD provided it, with Scandal in Bohemia published in Volume 1, Number 7, in July 1891. The magazine's covers got gaudier over the years, as you can see, but they're the same scene. So you have that church in the background and everything. So that was the Strand magazine. I had a friend who had an entire run of Strand magazine, and I think it sold for somewhere around $10,000, which is a lot of money. Excuse me. Obviously, the Strand was Doyle's favorite outlet, as you can see here. So this includes the Sherlock stories. And excuse me, he did have a tremendous output, and he's a wonderful author too. If you ever have the chance, read some of his non-Sherlockian stories. He was a good science fiction writer also. The first 6 stories were published in that year, then contracted for an additional 6. He was ready to kill Holmes so he could concentrate on his more serious work, quote unquote. But the man persuaded him not to, even providing some plot outlines. ACD finally pulled the plug, throwing Holmes over the Reichenbach Falls in December of 1893. We'll talk a lot more about the stories in Part B. This particular cartoon is from Punch magazine. Notice that ACD is shackled to Sherlock there. Here's a quiz.
Bob.
Say again?
That's a great image.
Yeah, isn't it though? Okay, here's a quiz to test your powers of observation. What was the name of the magazine that published A Study in Scarlet? Kevin?
Around.
It was Beaton's Christmas Annual.
Ooh.
Okay. So that particular magazine is very, very pricey nowadays. After Sherlock was off his back, ACD made a lecture tour of the U.S. in 1894 and started to build a house in Syria in the spring of 1895. He and Louisa traveled to Egypt during the construction, and he got the idea for more stories from the conflicts he observed there. The Boer War broke out in 1899, and ACD volunteered in the local regiment only to be placed on hold. A friend persuaded him to run a field hospital in Bloemfontein in the Orange Free State, which he did for 6 months in 1900. On his return, he ran for Member of Parliament from Edinburgh, but was defeated. He never did get elected despite several tries. In the fake news of the day, Britain was accused of all sorts of human rights abuses against the Boers. ACD wrote 2 books essentially saying nonsense, which earned him the honor of Knight Bachelor. He was known as Sir Arthur after that. So it wasn't Sherlock that got him his knighthood, it was these 2 books, which essentially bailed out the British government from all these rumors of abuse. Holmes made an appearance in Strand magazine with the serialized Hound of the Baskervilles in 1901 and 1902, and he was resurrected from the dead in 1903. His wife Louisa died in 1906, and this put him into a deep depression. He had met and fallen in love with Jean Lecky in 1897, with whom he retained a platonic relationship until after Louisa's death. He married Jean a year later in 1907, and she bore him 3 children at their estate in Crowborough. That's pretty amazing, you know, a girlfriend for 10 years while his wife is still hanging around there.
Yeah, and we have to take his word, right, that it was platonic.
Yes, of course. He created his favorite character in 1912, and that's Professor George Edward Challenger, with the novel The Lost World, followed by 2 more books and 2 short stories. Michael Crichton named the second Jurassic Park novel in homage to Challenger and Doyle. Here's the initial description of Challenger by Edward Malone, the narrator of the books, in other words, Challenger's Watson. His appearance made me gasp. I was prepared for something strange, but not for so overpowering a personality as this. It was his size which took one's breath away, his size and his imposing presence. His head was enormous, the largest I have ever seen upon a human being, and I'm sure that his top hat, had I ventured to don it, would have slipped over me entirely and rested on my shoulders. He had the face and beard which I associate with an Assyrian build, the former florid, the latter so black as almost to have a suspicion of blue, spade-shaped and rippling down over his chest. The hair was peculiar, plastered down in front with a long curling wisp over his massive forehead. His eyes were blue-gray under great black tufts, very clear, very critical, very masterful. A huge spread of shoulders and a chest like a barrel were the other parts of him which appeared above the table, save for 2 enormous hands covered with long black hair. This and a bellowing, roaring, rumbling voice made up my first impression of the notorious Professor Challenger. So he sounds like quite a guy. So this is a picture of the very first person to portray Challenger. Who is it? Any guesses? That's Doyle himself. Okay, over here. Okay, and that's out of his book. ACD may have been the perpetrator of the Piltdown Man hoax, if you've ever heard of that. That's the missing link, which was discovered in 1912 and debunked 41 years later. So it took 41 years for him to say, hey, this is really the missing link. It was the skull of a human and a jaw of an ape, or vice versa, not sure which, but he did a lot of practical jokes and everything. He loved doing that. ACD volunteered to serve in World War I, but was not permitted to go to the front. So he wrote a Why We Fight pamphlet and wrote the history of the war day by day, which was published in 1920 as The British Campaign in France and Flanders, 6 volumes. His son Kingsley and his brother Innes died as a result of war wounds complicated by pneumonia. The rest of his life was dedicated to spiritualism, which he had embraced since the late 1880s. He made several international tours speaking about the subject. He was friends with Harry Houdini for a time. He believed in fairies and had photographic evidence to back it up. Exhausted from his journeys, he fell sick and died of a heart attack on 7 July 1930. His last words to his wife were, "You are wonderful." So ended the life of a fascinating and complex man. He was originally buried in the Rose Garden of Winstead, his home, because he was not a Christian, but later reinterred with his wife in the churchyard of Minstead in New Forest, Hampshire. What was Doyle's full name? You remember that? Arthur Ignatius Conan Doyle is the proper answer. Now, we spent a lot of time on Doyle because he will not be prominent during the remainder of this presentation. This is the point where the great game kicks in. Holmes and Watson are historical figures, not fictional characters. And Watson's chronicles are of actual events. That's the grand game. ACD was the literary agent who sometimes edited Watson's work, not doing a very good job. Here are short biographies of our 2 protagonists based on the book Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street by William S. Baring Gould, also known as BG. Bear in mind that there are several different timelines of adventures, but we're sticking with BG's. His Annotated was a seminal work where he ordered the stories according to his own timeline. I saw that 2-volume set in London in 1979 for 60 quid, but didn't have a way of transporting it at the time, which is fortunate because I got the same set in the US for $60. And the exchange rate was about $2 per £1. So I got quite a deal out of that. If you were to ask the question, who is the most important character in the canon, most would answer Sherlock Holmes. Okay, I beg to differ from that opinion. I think the most important one is John H. Watson, MD. For without Watson, we would not know of Holmes. Just as Samuel Johnson had his Boswell, so Holmes had Watson. Watson serves another very important function. He is the bridge between the reader and Holmes. He is every man, not anywhere near Holmes's intellect, but able to support the relationship and tell the public about his best friend. But what of Watson the man? John Hamish Watson was born on 7 August 1852 to Henry Watson and Ella Mackenzie. One older brother, Henry, lost a line there. One older brother was Henry. The family moved to Australia after his mother died, then moved back to London to medical school, partly at St. Bart's, which is very, very important in the canon. He was attached to the 5th Northumberland Fusiliers as an assistant surgeon, and then sailed for India with a regiment where he served for 2 years. He was transferred to the Berkshires, 66 foot, in 1880, just in time for the Battle of Maiwand in the Second Afghan War, where he was wounded by a Giselle bullet. There's the Giselle rifle, the bullets they fired. He was shot in either the shoulder or the leg on 27 July 1880. His orderly Murray got him back behind British lines, where he spent a long recovery in a variety of hospitals. November of 1880 found him back in London, where he spent his meager funds getting established. In January of 1881, he met young Stamford at the Criterion Bar and mentioned that he was looking for digs. Stamford introduced him to Sherlock Holmes. And they moved into 221B Baker Street, an address that did not exist in the Victorian era. After a few adventures together, Watson moved to San Francisco in 1884 and bought a practice. He met Miss Constance Adams, fell in love, and they were married in November of 1886. The Watsons returned to England, and he bought a practice in Kensington and resumed his adventures with Holmes. Unfortunately, Constance died of diphtheria just after the Blue Carbuncle, so Watson returned to Baker Street. After several more adventures with Holmes, he met Mary Morstan during the Sign of Four and married her on 1 May 1889. He bought a practice in Paddington District, but Mary encouraged him to continue his relationship with Holmes. Then struck the day of tragedy, 4th of May, 1891, when Holmes and Professor Moriarty plunged over Reichenbach Falls in Switzerland. Watson returned to a practice that allowed him plenty of time for writing, but tragedy struck again in late 1891, 92, early 92, when Mary died of heart trouble. The only time Watson ever fainted was on 5 April 1894, when Holmes returned from the dead. It was back to Baker Street for them until July of 1902. And third Mrs. Watson. They took rooms at Queen Anne Street, and he built a thriving practice. Unfortunately, she wanted him to stay at home, but of course, Sherlock still called him frequently, and he always went. Their final case together was His Last Bow on 2 August 1914. There's no record of Watson's death, so of course he's still awaiting the next call from his best friend and companion. Where was Watson's war wound?
Well, at least his leg.
It was either in the shoulder or the leg. It was both were mentioned in the canon.
Put it on.
And one Sherlockian scholar wrote a piece on the magical bullet that migrated from the shoulder into the leg somehow. You know.
Oh, you hold.
Say again. Okay. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson went on a camping trip. After a good meal and a bottle of wine, they lay down for the night and went to sleep. Some hours later, Holmes awoke and nudged his faithful friend. Watson, look up at the sky and tell me what you see. Watson replied, I see millions and millions of stars. What does that tell you? Watson pondered for a moment. Astronomically, it tells me that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Astrologically, I observe that Saturn is in Leo. Horologically, I deduce the time is approximately 3:15. Theologically, I can see that God is all-powerful and that we are small and insignificant. Meteorologically, I suspect we will have a beautiful day tomorrow. What does it tell you? Holmes was silent for a moment and spoke. Watson, you see, but you do not observe. Somebody stole the tent. Okay. William Sherlock Scott Holmes was born on 6 January 1884 to Siger Holmes and Violet Sharonford at the family homestead, Mycroft, in North Riding, Yorkshire. He had 2 older brothers, Sharonford, named after his mother, and Mycroft, named after their farm. Mycroft equals my farm. The family lived in France from 1855 to 1864, with brief interludes in England. Sherlock and Mycroft were sent to boarding school in England, while Sharonford, who would inherit the estate, went to Oxford, 1864. Severe illness hit Sherlock 1865-66, and upon recovery, resumed his day studies. It was back to France in 1868 to 71, where Sherlock learned fencing. Back in England, he was tutored briefly by Professor James Moriarty, but they despised one another, and that gig was soon over. His father wanted him to be an engineer, so he enrolled in mathematics at Oxford in 1872. making friends with Charles Dodson. Who's Charles Dodson? Dodgson. He's also known as, he wrote under the pen name Lewis Carroll of Alice fame. His first recorded case was here at Oxford, the Gloria Scott, which changed the course of his life. He dropped out a decision that caused his father to disown him, giving him a reasonable allowance, but never seeing him again. And then it was on to Cambridge, where his methods were talked about all over school and cemented his determination to become the world's first consulting detective. He also did the adventure of the Musgrave ritual while at Cambridge. He never did get a degree. By the end of his studies at Camford, or was it Oxbridge, Holmes took rooms in Montague Street, just around the corner from the British Museum, where he spent countless hours studying the annals of crime for his new profession, reading the agony columns in the newspapers, and meeting people from all walks of life, like the anarchists, to study their habits, methods, and culture. Did he meet Karl Marx here? He certainly could have. He also studied organic chemistry at Bart's, where he may have passed Watson in the hallways, as they were both there at the same time. He incessantly wandered around London and becoming intimately familiar with its highways and byways and the people he met along the way. His most treasured possession was found during these wanderings, a Stradivarius he found in a pawn shop at Tottenham Court Road, which he bought for 55 shillings. Now, there's 20 shillings per pound, and a pound back then was worth $5 US. So he paid about $12 for that Stradivarius. Not bad at all. He was an amateur boxer, learning his skills in college, doing well in the ring. He also began writing several monographs on subjects like tobacco ash, ciphers, footprints, and the dating of documents, many of which Watson reports in the canon. He took occasional cases during this time, which helped build his reputation. Running low on funds, he gravitated to the theater using the stage name William S. Scott, where he played a variety of roles while learning everything he could about the theater and the art of disguise. On tour in the US, he was the first exposed to the American gangster culture and assisted the police in a few of their cases. He returned to England in 1880 with a healthy bankroll and was soon back at his studies in the British Museum and at Bart's. It was at the latter where he met Watson in 1881. So, how did he get his stage name? Okay, his stage name was William S. Scott. His full name was William Sherlock Scott Holmes. So William S. Scott. Okay. I mean, these Sherlockian scholars figure everything out for you. They took rooms at 221B Baker Street and settled into a comfortable existence. Here we get a glimpse of the main room with the chemistry labs at the left and right, the tobacco in the Persian slipper, and there's a Persian slipper right there in the mantelpiece, the cigars in the coal scuttle, and the typical over-furnished room in the Victorian era. The years between 1881 and 1891 are well documented by Watson, and we will not linger on them here. We meet his brother Mycroft, who is the British government, and lives at the Diogenes Club, where talking is forbidden. Needless to say, he kept an eye on his old tutor, Professor Moriarty, while gathering a case against him and his organization. Matters came to a head in 1891 when the case was nearly complete, that attacks on Holmes were increasing, and he decided to vacate London with Watson, even disguising himself as an Italian priest, and they toured the continent. It was in the Swiss village of Meiringen that he made that fateful trek to Reichenbach Falls, where he met Moriarty, grappled, and plunged into the abyss. When Watson delivered the news to the public, there was widespread disbelief. People went about in black armbands, and the entire nation went into mourning, all except one person. The next 3 years were known as the Great Hiatus. Only Moriarty died at Reichenbach, but Holmes still feared for his life, fleeing from Colonel Sebastian Moran, Moriarty's lieutenant and the second most dangerous man in London. He first went to Florence, then to Montenegro, where he met up with Irene Adler from A Scandal in Bohemia, the woman, and lingered there with her for several months. Pregnant, Irene returned to the US and gave birth to a boy who grew up to be another famous detective who displayed Mycroft's appearance and traits more than Sherlock's, rarely leaving his brownstone on West 35th Street. That detective is known as Nero Wolfe. So, in his own words, in The Empty House, I traveled for 2 years in Tibet. Therefore, and amused myself by visiting Lhasa and spending some days with the head Lama. You may have read the remarkable exploits of a Norwegian named Sigerson, but I am sure that it never occurred to you you were receiving news of your friend. I then passed through Persia and looked in at Mecca, paid a short but interesting visit to the Khalifa in Khartoum, the results of which I have communicated to the Foreign Office. Returning to France, I spent some months in a research in coal tar derivatives, which I conducted in a laboratory at Montpellier in the south of France. Holmes came back a changed man. He was unsure if he converted. It's unsure if he converted or merely followed the teachings of Buddhism, but you can see by this chart he did change. Never again did he use drugs. His alcohol intake, moderate before, became almost non-existent. He treated Watson with greater deference, if not respect, and showed his true feelings when Watson got shot in the adventure of the three Garridebs. His interests, always broad, focused on crime and his profession, but after it was anything goes. In the Bruce Partington plans, he studied polyphonic motets of Lassus, for which he wrote a monograph, said by experts to be the last word on the subject. As an aside, I found this score in a bookstore in San Diego. Us collectors are always looking on this kind of stuff. And of course, it helps to know that items like this have a canonical connection. Watson was busy with his third wife by this time and was only an occasional tenant of Baker Street. Their busiest year was 1895, and they had many wonderful adventures together. In late 1903, Holmes vacated the premises and moved to Sussex Downs to pursue beekeeping and his studies. He was briefly pulled out of retirement prior to World War I to head a spy ring against the Germans. His last bout was the final chronological case with Watson. There were occasional cases, but mostly he studied his bees and subsisted on royal jelly. He wrote two seminal works during his retirement: Practical Handbook of Bee Culture with some observations upon the segregation of the queen and The Whole Art of Detection. I would love to get my hands on either one of these volumes or both. We know that he is still with us because the London Times never reported his death. And so important a person must have been, so he's still with us. Any questions? Let's take a break, and I set up part 2, and I will see you in a few minutes.
Thank you, Bob.
Hope
My pleasure.
everyone's enjoying the program so far. Yay. I'm seeing some thumbs up. So again, thank you for coming tonight.
Liz, is this your first program?
No. So I run the programs, or I have since about March of 2016. This is, we're just adjusting to, COVID as it is. Usually if you were to come and see my programs in person, I'd be just in the back kind of monitoring everything. So it's similar. I'm just in this case at home monitoring everything. That's the one nice thing about Zoom. If I need to be home for the night, I'm like, oh, I can be and still run the program.
Have you done any other virtual programs, or is this the first virtual program, Liz?
Actually, we've had a couple. We've been doing virtual programs roughly since, I think since we got back in the library, definitely since, I think it was since either July or August we started doing them. We've been sort of slowly phasing them in. And with the fall, especially since it's getting darker out earlier, it's getting colder, we've been kind of ramping them up. So we've been doing, again, we're like, unfortunately, the next couple months are going to be a little quiet, but we're still going to have programs. So we have this, and also if you go to Jess's book groups or her film groups, we still have those virtually as well. I do my once a month film education series, which I have started doing that, which my parents joke, they're like, finally you can get paid in some way to talk about film, because they always said I should be a film critic, and I'm like, that no one pays for that anymore. But we're having that. We're having the animation program in December. We're going to have a program on the creepy Christmas, so the darker side of Christmas lore, because like a lot of our old holidays and old fairy tales, when you really start looking into them, they're very creepy. And we're also going to have a program on seasonal affective disorder. I still never know if I say that right. And I'm going to present a film education series on what makes a Christmas movie. So how certain films get accepted into the Christmas film canon. I think most people know that It's a Wonderful Life is now widely accepted as a Christmas movie. That's a film that didn't do well when it was released, and the only way it became associated with Christmas was a person who programmed television really liked it and kept showing it around Christmas time. And then there's films like Miracle on 34th Street, which are always, Christmas classics. And yes, I will talk about how Die Hard is considered a Christmas film. I'm not sure I agree with, but my favorite Christmas film is Gremlins. So Gremlins and The Nightmare Before Christmas.
That's an interesting choice.
I mean, it's about a Christmas gift gone wrong.
That's very appropriate for 2020.
Oh. Shh. Don't let the universe hear. Who knows? We still have 2 months left. Oh, there we go. Looks like part 2 is going to start. I forget, there was a meme that went around this summer where apparently they found an organism frozen in Antarctica, and they're like, this is not the year. Don't unfreeze it. Leave it alone. All righty. Robert, you all set?
1950s a movie about that called The Thing.
The Thing, yes, and an amazing remake by John Carpenter. Alrighty, I'll let Robert take the helm again.
Okay, let the phone stop ringing here.
All right.
There it goes. These darn, vote for my guy. Well, guess what? That happened yesterday. So I hope everybody did vote yesterday. It's one of our constitutional responsibilities. Okay, so here we are in part B. And we're going to talk about books, movies, and TV. A little bit about the canon, so on and so forth. Lots of good stuff here. And at the end, we will have a little quiz. Now, if I do this in person, there's always a prize for the person who gets the most questions right. But we can't do that here, but we'll go through it anyway to have a little bit more fun. Okay, so how many short stories and how many novels are in the Sherlockian canon? Okay,
4
So-
novels?
we have 4 novels, right? And we have 58 short stories. Oh, wait a minute. I said 56 earlier, didn't I?
Yes.
But we have that pesky literary agent who wrote 2 on his own. The Field Bazaar in 1896 and How Watson Learned the Trick in 1924. Both are shorts about a page and a half long, and neither is very good. Both have Watson attempting to do deductions like Holmes, which of course he fails miserably. There were 4 unofficial writings also. 3 of them do not specifically mention Holmes, but an investigator who sounds an awful lot like him. The last one is a stage play that ran for 28 performances in 1921. The Adventure of the Mazarin Stone was based on this play and was published shortly thereafter. Okay, what was the first Sherlock Holmes story and what magazine?
Sign of the Four.
The
No.
Strand.
Study in Scarlet in Beaton's Christmas Annual. Okay, there we go. Okay, that story was met with underwhelming success. In fact, the literary agent only received £25 for it, and the estate could not get it back, no matter how hard they tried. Most of the stories begin with the adventure of, which can be quite cumbersome. So another Sherlockian named J. Finley Christ devised a shorthand that is in universal use. It's simple. Take the first 4 letters of the title for the most part. You can see that there are some exceptions, but it works. So if I talk about SOLI, for example, everybody knows that it's the adventure of the solitary cyclist. Of course, there are exceptions, like the adventure of Charles Augustus Milverton, which is Chaz right here. So on and so forth. As noted earlier, the second novel was The Sign of Four. Then Watson started pumping out short stories to the Strand magazine in 1891. The first 6 were met with resounding success, then 6 more, then 12 more. The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes was released in a bound volume in 1892, followed by memoirs in 1893. These stories have never been out of print since then. In Sign of Four, we see that Watson met his second wife, Mary Morstan. And in Scandal in Bohemia, Holmes met Irene Adler, the woman. Of course, she gets the better of him, which fuels his admiration. George Nunes, publisher of The Strand, needed an illustrator for these short stories, and he set his sights on Walter Paget, who was a noted illustrator. But the letter was just addressed to Mr. Paget, so his brother Sidney, also an illustrator, opened the letter and responded and got the job. Sidney had based his depiction of Holmes on his brother, and you can see the resemblance. Zillions of fans know of Holmes through his drawings signed SP, which you can see down here at the bottom of the illustration. Watson often referred to cases that could not be chronicled or were too dreadful for the public. Well, there's another Sidney Paget there. He kept all these manuscripts in a battered tin dispatch box in the vaults of Cox and Company of Charing Cross. This poem by J. Finley Christ was written in homage to these stories. In the vaults of Cox, there was an old tin box with Watson's name on its lid. What wouldn't we pay for that box today and the secret notes there hid? Old Russian Dame Recoletti the Lame, the famous aluminum crutch, the famous for Alicia the Cutter, the parsley and butter, What would you give for such? The story of Randall, the Darlington scandal, the Coptic patriarchs, the Opal Tiara, the Addington Barrow, dollars or francs or marks? The tale in the pinch of Victor Lynch, the furniture warehouse mob, the case at The Hague, the murder at Prague, the powderless Margate job, the giant rat, the Cardinal's hat, the Pattersons, first name Grice, the Cormorant's Mill, the Hammerford Well. We'd take 'em at any price. This Phillimore fella who sought an umbrella, this steamer Friesland, it was Dutch. For Colonel Carruthers or Atkinson Brothers, one could never give too much. The Vatican case in its cameo face, the slithering unknown worm. The Abergavenny were none too many. Or is this Cox's firm? A wonderful box in the vaults of Cox, you come with a touch of salt. But I'd offer 2 blocks of the choicest stocks for the treasure of Cox's vault. Okay, where are we here? There was another poem written by my friend James Duval, whose BSI investiture was the battered tin dispatch box. He passed away far too early at the age of 42. Holmes had a strange sense of justice, which the Victorians ate up. On occasion, he let the perp go, as in The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle, and at other times causing injury or even death, as in the case of Charles Augustus Milverton. He lost a few clients by sending them into danger, like John Openshaw in The 5 Orange Pips, or Hilton Cubbott in The Dancing Men, who died trying to defend his wife from her past. One of my favorite Holmes stories is Silver Blaze, about a missing racehorse and a dead trainer. Holmes's investigation led him to one of the iconic exchanges in the canon, where the inspector asks, is there any point to which you would like to draw my attention? To the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime. The dog did nothing in the nighttime. That was a curious incident. So, why did the dog do nothing in the nighttime? Kevin?
There was nothing to bark at.
He knew the perp who was stealing the horse, okay? Holmes's conduct during Silver Blaze should have landed him in a deep, dank dungeon. He finds the horse but doesn't tell anybody. And then he tells the owner to keep the horse in the race, but keeps the horse in disguise. Finally, he lays down a huge bet when the odds are astronomical. What do you think? Would that have been a violation of every horse racing rule in the book? I think so. So Silver Blaze goes into a bar. Bartender says, why a long face? You want another one? His son goes into a bar. I'd like a beer, please. What's wrong, laryngitis? No, I'm just a little hoarse. Okay. There were several Violets in the canon, 4 to be exact. There was Violet Hunter in the Copper Beeches, Violet Smith, the solitary cyclist, Violet Westbury in Bruce Partington Plans, and Violet de Merville in The Illustrious Client. Maybe because his mother was also named Violet, that Holmes looked upon these ladies with a bit of equanimity. Otherwise, he was a confirmed misogynist. Everyone has a top something list, and here there are several for the canon. The Baker Street Journal conducted several polls over the years with varying results. Here's the one chosen by the literary agent, ACD himself. The speckled band at the top and the Reigate Squires is number 12. Red-Headed League number 2, Dancing Men, Final Problem, Scandal in Bohemia, Empty House, 5 Orange Pips, Second Stain, Devil's Root, Priory School, Musgrave Ritual, and the Reigate Squires. Okay, without a doubt, the most famous Holmes story is The Hound of the Baskervilles. Not only was this the first Sherlock Holmes book to hit the bestseller list, it was the first detective novel to hit the bestseller list. The story is based on a West County legend of a demonic hound which the literary agent suggested to Watson to recount the tale of his deceased friend. So this story was actually published during the Great Hiatus, when the public still thought Holmes was dead. So obviously the case was done while he was still alive. It was first published in 9 installments in the Strand magazine, August 1901 to April 1902. If you want a copy of these 2 bound volumes, it'll run you $550 to $800, depending on the condition. With only a few months before the first bound volume of it was only a few months before the first bound volume of the novel was published. If you want a copy of the British first edition, most of which are pretty raggedy, as you can see here, you fork over $700 to several $1,000s. American first editions are somewhat less, but they're still pretty pricey. And if you want a pristine, specially bound, leather bound, original signed by ACD himself, $12,500. Really have to be a big Sherlock fan to get for that. Just a quick word about pastiches and parodies. They abound. Just back in the 1970s, Ronald Doyle wrote a bibliography that contained over 6,000 entries. Later writings by this author in the 90s have resulted in over 25,000 different listings, which are just the various writings, and the list keeps growing. Writings and movies and radio programs, the whole works. A pastiche is an artistic work in a style that imitates that of another work, artist, or period. Some of my favorite pastiches are Solar Ponds by August Derleth, taken over by Basil Copper upon Derleth's death. The stories have a remarkable resemblance to another London detective. A popular series is Mary Russell by Laurie R. King, although I am not a fan. Hopefully you have some favorite authors also. Parodies, on the other hand, make fun of the characters. The king of the Sherlock Holmes parodies was Sherlock Holmes of Bagel Street with his friend Dr. Watney by Robert L. Fish. There's an award named after him for the best first short story by an American author, best mystery short story, first story. Another favorite parody is Mad Magazine's The Hound of the Basketballs, starring Sherlock Holmes. Have any questions or comments so far? Have any favorites?
Speckled Man, best one written.
There you go. Okay. Now, the list of actors portraying Holmes is impressive, with over 75 in 254 productions as of 2012. So that's the latest number I got. There are many well-known names on the list, and many obscure ones also. We'll talk about the former as we progress, but here's a list of people we have no idea even existed. The earliest dramatic depictions of Holmes were on the stage. Wrong one. I was told I should be on the stage, but the one leaving within the hour. There we go. There we go with our stage. Although not the first, the earliest famous stage actor was William Gillette, who Sherlock Holmes played for decades around the world. The play was originally written by Doyle, but it was so bad that Gillette was given the rewrite and the lead. Gillette once inquired, "May I marry Holmes?" To which Conan Doyle replied, "You may marry him, murder him, or do anything you like to him." It was Gillette who gave Holmes the curved pipe, even though the story is usually described as straight-stemmed pipe. The reason was simple. A straight pipe would hide the actor's face, where a curved pipe would not. So if you're holding a pipe in front of a straight pipe, your hand's up in front of your face, curved pipe, it's down there. Okay. It made him a rich man, and he built a castle overlooking the Connecticut River in Hadlime, Connecticut. It's now a state park and open to the public. Frank Langella revived Gillette's play in the late 70s and even presented it on HBO. Fritz Weaver started in the musical Baker Street, which ran for 311 performances in the mid-60s. It was nominated for 4 Tonys and won one for set design. Also pictured on a playbill are Martin Gable, husband of Arlene Francis, as Professor Moriarty, and Inga Svensson as Irene Adler. Ron Moody started in another musical Holmes production in the late 1980s. Now, this is the guy who is well known for turning down Doctor Who. Yow is right. There are some surprising names on the list also. Leonard Nimoy, Charlton Heston, and Tom Baker, who did accept Doctor Who. We best know Holmes through the silver screen and the tube. Okay, now here are some of our favorites, and I'm sure you have favorites also. So we have Basil Rathbone, Peter Cushing, Ronald Howard, not Opie from, this is the son of Leslie Howard, who played Ashley on Gone with the Wind. Okay, Christopher Lee, Jeremy Brett, Robert Downey Jr., who I thought absolutely reeked as Holmes. I didn't like that at all. Johnny Lee Miller, Benedict Cumberbatch, and Patrick McNee. These are all people who have, well-known people who have depicted Holmes. How about Watson? Is it H. Marion Crawford? He was Ronald Howard's Watson. David Burke, Patrick McNee. McNee is the only person that I know of who played both Holmes and Watson in different films. Edward Hardwicke, Jude Law, Lucy Liu, Martin Freeman, or old Bubis Britannicus himself, Nigel Bruce. Again, this is just a short list. There are many, many more. Of course, we had to scrape the bottom of the barrel to come up with the worst performances. Here are my picks for 3 of the most painful depictions of the master. We have Roger Moore, Tom Baker, and who's the third guy there? He was in Doctor, I think, Max Headroom. And I don't have it listed down.
Matt Frewer.
That's it, Matt Frewer. Thank you. Okay, audio is also a very important part of the wonderful world of Holmes. I ran across this website that has a ton of Rathbone Bruce radio programs. Great listening. Many of these programs were written by Anthony Boucher, namesake of BoucherCon, which is a big mystery convention every year, except this year, of course, and Dennis Green. Most of these scripts are based on the unwritten stories and were broadcast from 1939 to 1946. In each, the narrator asked Dr. Watson, who's Nigel Bruce, for the story. I must say that Bruce is a much better Watson on the radio than he was in the movies, because he played an absolute idiot in the movies. If you want to copy down that URL there, I'll leave this up for a few seconds. Yep. Okay, you can find all sorts of audio on eBay and other sites. Here are just a few of them. The one in the upper center is a complete set of the Beebs 1991 radio series starring Clive Merrison as Holmes. It faithfully adapted all 60 canonical stories and is quite pricey, about $150 plus. But there's, a ton of CDs in there. The others can be had for modest sums on eBay and Amazon for hours and hours of listening pleasure. I'm going to skip this quiz right here. Christopher Morley was the inventor of the 3 Hours for Lunch Club, which met anywhere, unlike the Algonquin Round Table, which is always at the Algonquin Hotel, and was dissolved after every meeting, then reformed for the next get-together. Morley was famous for creating clubs, but the one that most endured was the Baker Street Irregulars. He wrote the introduction to the complete Sherlock Holmes published by Doubleday, which is my first copy of the canon. Now, the only downside to that volume was there were no illustrations. The Baker Street Irregulars are the leading Sherlockian society in the US. Their journal is called, amazingly enough, the Baker Street Journal. Their purpose is to keep the memory of the master green, where it is always 1895, Holmes's busiest year. They meet every January in New York City for a week of fun and shenanigans. The actual meeting is by invitation only, and you must be invited to be invested into the society, where you take a canonical name. Non-BSI people can participate also with separate banquets and can join in the outside activities. Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine has at least one Holmes story in its January-February issue, hitting the stands in time for BSI week. Now, why does the BSI meet in January? It's Holmes's birthday, that's why. January 6th. It's been determined that his birthday was January 6th because he quoted Twelfth Night twice, and it's the only outside work that he has done twice or quoted twice. Okay, Sherlockian societies abound. Most of them scion societies of the BSI, meaning officially sanctioned. You can see that there are a ton of them, but this number is way down from the time from when I got involved back in the 25 years ago. Many are puns on canonical titles or phrases, like the Sons of Copper Beaches in Philadelphia, or direct references like the Speckled Band of Boston, which we call the Snakes. You can see by my investiture certificate, I have been invested in the fourth Garadeb, which is numismatics of Sherlock Holmes for coin collectors. And I am known as the Coiner, which is a reference, a character in the canon. I'm a founder of that society also. These chapters, societies create logos, chapter books, magazines, pins, and all sorts of other wonderful things. Okay, there's an incredible amount of Sherlock-related material out there. Now, this is an eBay search from not too long ago on the simple phrase Sherlock Holmes. Look at the number of hits. I just looked a few minutes ago, and it's 58,008 hits today. Hamilton Bookseller, who have remainder people or sell remainders, currently offered 67 different titles. Now, one of the websites is called Sherlocktron, and one of their lists is a list of purveyors. This is page 21 of that list, and you can see it's just I's and J's. All sorts of stuff available. Scripts and German videos and audiobooks, tour books, shoes and boots, chess sets, so on and so forth. And that's Sherlocktron at Sherlocktron. It's part of that Sherlockian.net website. Okay. Almost done. Questions, comments? $50 bills? No? Okay. Here's the final quiz. Okay. 2 possible answers. And when we do it live, I have everybody stand up. And if you get one wrong, you sit down, and the last person standing wins the prize. Usually some kind of Holmes book. Okay. What was Holmes's full name? Was it William Scott Sherlock Holmes or William Sherlock Scott Holmes? A or B? Anybody?
A.
B is absolutely right. Okay. What was the duo's busiest year? 1895 or 1894? Just told you a few minutes ago. Okay. Holmes returned in 1894 and went gangbusters the following year. That's why I remember where it is always 1895. What was ACD's favorite Sherlock Holmes story? Was it The Speckled Band or The Red-Headed League?
A.
A, The Speckled Band, right. Red-Headed League was number 2 on his list. Who was ACD's favorite character? Professor Challenger or Sherlock Holmes?
Challenger.
Challenger, right. ACD despised Holmes and thought he was interfering with his more serious writings. Where did Holmes keep his pipe tobacco at 221B? In the coal scuttle or in the toe of a Persian slipper?
Flipper.
It was actually in the toe of the Persian slipper. The cigars were in the coal scuttle. Okay. What was Holmes's father's first name? Siger or Sharonford?
B.
Somebody said B. Actually, it's A, Siger. Sharonford was his older brother who inherited the estate. And when Holmes did his adventures as a Norwegian explorer, he was known as Siger's son. Sigerson. Where did Watson spend his boyhood? We've kind of glossed over this. Was it Australia or the United States?
Australia.
Australia, very right. Who portrayed Sherlock Holmes on stage first? Was it William Gillette or Basil Rathbone?
A.
A, William Gillette, yes. Has anybody been down to the Gillette Castle? It's quite a fascinating place, built out of native stone. Gillette designed it himself. And the Great Hall, there's a place he can stand in the balcony of the Great Hall and hear every conversation in the room. That's pretty amazing. And William Gillette, of course, is absolutely right. What was Holmes's favorite section of the newspapers? Crime news or the agony columns?
Would have to be A.
Actually, it was the agony columns. Okay, that's where we found out what's happening. In our country, we call them the personal ads, the personals. Okay, but okay. What was Mycroft Holmes's silent club? Was it the Diogenes Club or the Montpelier Club?
A.
A, that's right. Diogenes was the man with the lantern looking for an honest man. And there we have it. That's all, folks. Thank you very much.
Yay.
You.
Thank you.
I actually have a quick question. I have this in my, I could just be like completely misremembering something, but doesn't there are books about Mycroft Holmes, and recently isn't former basketball player Kareem Abdul-Jabbar the one who writes them?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't make that up.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I just saw a couple of Kareem's books on Hamilton Book.
So these people know it, but they're not.
Yeah.
Or some of
If
them
you haven't
don't.
visited hamiltonbook.com, they got zillions of books. They're all remainders, you know.
Okay.
So if a publisher prints too many books and
Yep.
can't sell them, they go to Hamilton for disposal. And I've gotten some wonderful stuff for very cheap. A couple of books recently were originally sold for $150 and I got them for $15. So, and these are all new unless they state differently. HamiltonBook.com. They're
Okay.
down in Falls Village, Connecticut.
Awesome. That is a good thing to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? Any comments or anything?
Questions?
I was just surprised that you did not mention Michael Caine playing Sherlock Holmes in the 7% Solution. Wasn't
Oh,
7%?
that's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
I forgot about him. That page is pretty crowded anyhow. So we'll leave it be. So I'm going to turn it back over to Liz there, and who can conclude this this program.
It doesn't shock me Michael Caine played Sherlock Holmes. He famously doesn't turn rules down. I mean, the man was in Jaws 4.
Right.
And as he joked, it helped pay for a beach house. All right. Well, everyone, thank you for coming. I hope that you enjoyed the program, and hopefully that maybe sooner rather than later we will have in-person programming again. But if not, I will see you all hopefully again virtually via Zoom. So you can go to our website, dairypl.org, and our calendar does list all of our other online events. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.